I'm just thinking of loads of things that you could do. You could bake a rainbow cake and share that with people with information about I don't know, actually that's a terrible idea.
I quite like that. I think that was all great. I'd eat your rainbow cake. I don't think you should be so hard on yourself. Hi Platform, I'm Amelia Abraham. I'm a writer and I also just edited this book, We Can Do Better Than This, which is an anthology about LGBTQ+ rights. I'm here today with one of the contributors, Fox Fisher, to talk about allyship and why it's important.
Hey everybody, I'm Fox Fisher. I'm a brown, queer, non-binary, trans-masculine artist, filmmaker and author.
Right, so in terms of practical things that we can do to be allies, let's start with the fundamentals. Fox, what would you say is the most basic thing about allyship?
Check in with the person and just say, hey, how you doing? You know, I heard you had an appointment at the GIC, for example, the Gender Identity Clinic. How did it go? Or do you need a lift to the station? Or, you know, maybe not even talking about LGBTQIA issues, just kind of seeing how they're doing, you know, generally with their well-being. That goes a really long way. Going away and educating yourself separately to that person so that you can be more supportive and you're not kind of bombarding that person with all sorts of questions, because I think that's quite a common thing that I had at the start of my transition. And I think a lot of the stuff that people were asking me could have been searched independently on a search engine.
Yeah, to pick up on what you said about educating yourself, I think something that's really important is that can also be enjoyable or fun. You know, it doesn't have to be like doing your homework. There are so many like amazing TV shows and films you can watch. I mean, maybe if you have any examples, that would be really helpful with people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would always recommend that people have a look at some of the films that I've made via My Generation. So we've been going for almost 10 years, and the whole point of My Generation is being able to present people, trans people, as people with a lot of other intersections going on where they, you know, you can connect with someone because you both like racing cars, or you're both like you know, art, for example. So yeah, check out My Generation films. And book-wise, there's so many books out there, including the one that we're chatting about today, and as well as I've got a few books out there as well. There's a trans teen survival guide that you can check out.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up all the amazing work you've been doing, because you've been doing it for a really long time and it's really important that people go out and find it. And I'm also really glad that you brought up We Can Do Better Than This, because the whole point of it is to bring together 35 different voices from across the LGBTQ+ spectrum and across the whole world, and have people share their experiences and their stories. So I think these are good ways to educate yourself that can hopefully also be enjoyable. Let's talk about language, because language is also quite important when it comes to allyship. I always remember when I was coming out when I was about 18, 19, first as bisexual and now I identify as a lesbian. One thing that my parents would always do is, well, my mother in particular would always call my girlfriends or someone I was dating my friend. You know, which the problem with that is it just makes you feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with the fact that you're dating a woman. And another thing would maybe be, if I said the word lesbian, she would always tut, like, or she would, if she said gay, she would always say it in hushed tones. And the thing about that is, I don't think she was doing it maliciously, it's just that's how she'd been taught to respond or to feel by society. And it took a lot of work sort of challenging her on that. But those to me are examples of you know, ways that we can use language that are harmful. So I wanted to ask you, what are ways that we can use language that are positive and really helpful?
That's a really good question, and first of all, I can absolutely relate. Before I came out as trans, I was also defining in my teenage years as a lesbian, and my parents did the same thing where they were like, how's your friend? And I was like, well, me and my friend aren't together anymore, you know? And it was just really awkward. And I think I think people have had difficulties with understanding LGBTQIA plus people because there hasn't been a lot of examples of that in the past. And if there has been, it's been kind of extreme examples in the mainstream media with people who have lives that we can't fully relate to because they're superstars or whatever. I wasn't born knowing the language around trans issues, for example, and that's something that I've learned as well. So we've all gone on this journey, and of course language is always evolving. So for example, we probably wouldn't have used the word queer maybe 10 plus years ago because it was seen as an insult, but there's been a reclaiming of that word now. So and I'm really proud to be queer, and I'm really proud to be non-binary, and
it's also probably a good moment to say that allyship isn't just for cisgender, so not trans people or straight people, it's also for LGBTQ plus people to help those within their communities, right?
Absolutely. So we are a very, very broad community. We range in every possible way. Although being non-binary isn't a new thing per se, it's being talked about a lot more over the past 5 years or so. And so even within the trans community or the LGBTQIA plus community, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what it is to be non-binary. And so it's important for people to recognize that your own identity as a man or a woman isn't affected by someone's identity as non-binary. And non-binary people have existed throughout the ages, and there's even a website I think where you can have a look at indigenous cultures which recognize more than two genders, which I find very comforting as well, because I don't like the idea of people thinking that I'm being difficult or that it's a fad or any of those things that people say about non-binary people. So I think it really is important to look after the more vulnerable members of our community, which often are Black trans women, for example, non-binary femmes, people who stand out as being gender non-conforming.
Yeah, you picked up on something there which I've been thinking about, which is that we know that more and more people are identifying as queer and trans as society is becoming, hopefully, in many ways more accepting. And the more queer and trans and non-binary people there are, the more allies we need, right? Or the more likely you are to have someone who's queer, trans or non-binary in your life.
When I was first starting my transition, it really made my day if somebody was able to use the right pronouns for me. And I haven't always looked like this or sounded like this, so I think it would have been a real effort on some people's, for some people to do at the beginning, but it really meant a lot to me. A really good suggestion is that if you're meeting someone and maybe their gender seems ambiguous to you, or you'd just like to know what pronouns to use for them, you can say, hey, what my pronouns are. For example, for me, I would say my pronouns are he, they. What pronouns do you use? And that's just a great way to kind of to be respectful to that person. And people worry about messing up as well, and I would also say I mess up people's pronouns as well sometimes, and if I do that, I just say, oh sorry, and just correct myself and move on.
Yeah, it's also a great way to practice someone in your life's pronouns if they've just changed their pronouns. By using them when they're not around, talking about that person in the third person, you get used to it when they're not even there. So then when you are with them, you'll be more likely to get it right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think overall it's just about making the effort, isn't it? And I think it's about remembering that whether someone's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, they've maybe taken a long time to get to a place where they can identify in that way and use those words for themselves. So using them in front of that person or using them for that person, the labels that they might have chosen or the pronouns that they might have chosen helps validate their existence, and that's a really important thing.
Yeah, it's massively important to help someone to feel that they're seen and that they're being respected for who they are, regardless of where they're at on their journey, for sure.
So another great way to be an ally is listening, and Riyad Khalaf, who's one of the contributors for We Can Do Better Than This, has actually written an essay all about how to be a good ally and how allyship starts at home, and he uses the example of his father. And I'm just going to read out a little bit from the book where he talks about the importance of listening in allyship. Living in what some people call the closet is one of the most frustrating and difficult times in a person's life. Unimaginable amounts of feelings and thoughts go unheard, unspoken, and suppressed. It's like having a piece of duct tape over your mouth for years. Now is their time to have the soapbox and express how they feel in an uninhibited way. It may be laboursome or feel like all they talk about is their sexuality or gender identity, but that's to be expected. This is an exciting time for them, so let them experience it and get involved by asking questions and validating what they say. It'll bring you closer. When you listen, also be sure to take them at their word. If someone tells you they are bisexual, for example, that is their truth, not a phase, as some people think. Likewise, if someone says they are questioning their sexuality, don't try to bring them to any conclusions. they'll reach their own eventually, and it might be that there isn't one. I love that from Riyadh. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say is important when it comes to listening and allyship?
I really love that piece from Riyadh. That was so good. When it comes to listening and allyship, it's exactly that people should just give the space for whoever is questioning their gender or sexuality to just be who they are. And there are many stages. Like, for example, you were telling me that you were identifying as bisexual before you came out as a lesbian. For me, I was a drag king before I came out as transgender, so I guess I was a transsexual before I was transgender. And that was an important stage for me in recognizing who I was. And by being a good ally, you're just giving people that space to be who they are without judgment, without forcing them to do something. Because when I was forced to wear dresses when I was a kid, and I really hated it. And obviously somebody wearing a dress doesn't change their gender identity, but there was like little clues or indications with that. And if I'd been allowed to just be who I was, I feel like I would have had a more fulfilling childhood in many ways. But I ended up feeling like what I was doing was wrong, that I was a bad or a naughty child, because I wouldn't conform to what my parents wanted. So I would just encourage people to really be respectful to that person who is exploring who they are, and just allow them to have that space without judgment.
I heard recently that you can volunteer for Opening Doors London's telefriending service, which is where 1 hour a week you call a member of the elderly LGBTQ+ community and just have a chat with them, check that they're not feeling too isolated. And I thought, wow, I really want to do that at some point, because you'll probably learn so much about LGBTQ+ history. And then another one I heard about was a friend of mine who's really good at cooking was volunteering at the Ali Fournay Centre in New York, which is an LGBTQ+ homelessness shelter, and cooking for all the people that use that shelter. And I thought that was really cool and really fun too, and I bet you meet so many great people. I wonder if you had any advice about the situation that might arise, which is when you find yourself around someone who's maybe expressing homophobic, biphobic or transphobic views, how you can maybe challenge them on those views in a way that sort of feels constructive.
An example is when I went to my back garden, I could hear my neighbour talking about Caitlyn Jenner, who is a famous trans woman. And Caitlyn Jenner her lived experience is not the same at all as the lived experience of just a trans person who doesn't have lots of money or a TV show, for example. But yet she's still a trans person, and by hearing transphobia from my neighbour, it just didn't sit well with me at all, because I thought that she was supportive of trans issues, and then I had to hear her views on Caitlyn Jenner, and she was calling her a man and all sorts of things. So what I wished I'd done was just said something at the time, but actually I did a post on Facebook, and it turns out that we were friends on Facebook as well, and so she responded via that, and so we had kind of a written conversation about it, which felt kind of better for me.
Yeah. Something I try to do is ask people where their views come from. If they say something that I don't necessarily agree with, I've done this a lot with my family and it works quite well. Why do you think that, or where did you learn that, or where did you see that? And then maybe you can, without being a real smart ass about it, because that doesn't go down well, just then sort of try and take that into sort of interrogation of how much they really know. Oh well, have you met a trans person that said that, or do you think that's necessarily definitely true? And then you can bring in your own experience and say, well, my friend who's trans says this, or I read this, and maybe start to counter those views as more of a kind of back and forth conversation. I find that can be really constructive. That's
such great advice, Amelia, because what you're talking about is family members or workmates, for example, that might just have a certain view, and that there is that movable middle where you can have a reasonable conversation with people and say, yes, just wondering where you pick that up, or that kind of idea, because often cis people get their information from other cis people talking about trans issues, for example. So
on the subject of challenging maybe transphobia, or not even outright transphobia, but maybe just like a lack of knowledge or confusion. Something that's been really, really heartening for me to see recently is that my sibling has decided that they're non-binary and they're exploring transitioning. And my dad is being the most amazing ally, maybe because, you know, he's sort of had a bit of practice with me when I've come out. But one thing that's been really good to see him doing is talking to his friends about trans issues, specifically when my sibling is not around, and sort of explaining to his friends who are of an older generation that my younger sibling is now using they, them pronouns, why they've changed their name. And it's just so good to see him doing that with a group of people who maybe don't know that much about the topic, and also when my sibling's not even there.
My dad, like your dad, is that person who will send articles. He'll read something about trans issues or non-binary issues and he'll send it over to me, and often I've already read it, or I know the person who's written it or whatever, but it just means so much that he's going out of his way to do that, and that does have a knock-on effect, as you say, with people around him as well, with around our dads. Yeah, they're able to help raise awareness and help other people to understand trans issues without actually imposing upon the trans person themselves. So that's true allyship, I think.
Definitely, and I think there's something else you can do, maybe if you're at school or in your workplace, which is if you feel that there's a bit of a lack of understanding of LGBTQ+ issues around you and it feels a bit overwhelming to try and sort of educate everyone, maybe you can speak to one of your teachers or your boss and ask, hey, could we do some sort of training in this? Could we do a lesson on this? Could we have someone to come in and talk about this? And then you're not taking it all on yourself, but you've kind of engineered it behind the scenes. A point that I really wanted to bring up under the topic of allyship as well is not assuming people's sexuality or gender. It kind of sounds simple, but it's really, really important. You know, for instance, a lot of people are asexual, which means that they don't really experience like sexual attraction. So not assuming that everyone is sexually attracted to other people is a really important thing to do. Not assuming people's gender identity, as we've picked up on before, maybe asking them. And also giving people room to be fluid or to be exploring or to change their mind is also really important.
Sharing a post, it could be sharing an article that someone's written on a very basic level that just shows your support for the community. You could be signing petitions for various reasons to do with trans rights or LGBTQIA rights in other countries, for example. You could be supporting small businesses like myself, for example. I make a lot of LGBTQIA related enamel pins and stickers and stuff, often to raise money for My Generation, which is a non-profit. Volunteering to do some work, like whether it's on the phones, for example. LGBTQ switchboard has been going for a really long time, but they of course still need people on the phones to be there, and there's a few other different support lines like that out there. Even if it's for something like Mind, for example, that deals with specifically mental health issues, that's really great. I mean, being trans, for example, isn't a mental health issue, but sometimes if you don't get support that you need, it can be really difficult for an LGBTQIA person, and you know, that there's definitely help out there that people can give by just being a listening ear. This type of thing is always an ongoing conversation. There's always so much more that we could discuss around how to support LGBTQIA people, or what it means to be, you know, non-binary or trans and queer and so on. But I feel I don't know about you, but I just feel really positive that we're able to have conversations like this, and that we're making, you know, that you're making books like the one that you've made that has so many incredible people involved and who are doing their own stuff within the field, like Beth Ditto, for example, who's making music. And, you know, Beth Ditto is making the world a better place by just being herself. So I think the greatest gift that people have or can give to this world is just to be yourself. You know, it's just so simple, but I just want people to know that they can, you know, that being you is just enough in this world, and you know, what else is there to do other than to be yourself?
I couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed it. And I also hope you go out and find We Can Do Better Than This. It's got some amazing people in it talking about LGBTQ+ rights, from Ollie Alexander to Pablo Vittar to Fox, who you've just met. I really hope you like it, and please subscribe to Platform for more bookish videos.